Okay, and you should hopefully be hearing me. I hope. I remember to unmute the microphone this time. Yay! So do the volume levels sound about right for the background rain as opposed to me? The rain's a little quiet. Okay, I think I can turn it up a little bit. Okay, let me know if that's good or if you want it turned up a little lower or a little higher. Okay. Is that good for you, Owl? Because everyone must be happy here. Okay, we will get started reading then. We are on Book 4, Chapter 3. The Black Gate is closed. That sounds ominous. Before the next day dawned, their journey to Mordor was over. The marshes and the desert were behind them. Before them, darkling against a pallid sky, the great mountains reared their threatening heads. Upon the west of Mordor marched the gloomy range of Duath, the mountains of shadow, and upon the north the broken peaks and barren ridges of arid Lithwi, grey as ash. But as these ranges approached one another, being indeed but parts of one great wall about the mournful plains of Lithled and Gorgoroth, and the bitter inland sea of Nuren Amidmost, they swung out low arms northward, and between these arms there was a deep defile. This was Cirith Gorgor, the haunted pass, the entrance to the land of the enemy. High cliffs lowered upon either side, and thrust forward from its mouth were two sheer hills, black-boned and bare. Upon them stood the teeth of Mordor, two towers strong and tall. In days long past they were built by the men of Gondor in their pride and power, after the overthrow of Sauron and his flight, lest he should seek to return to his old realm. But the strength of Gondor failed, and men slept, and for long years the towers stood empty. Then Sauron returned. Now the watchtowers, which had fallen into decay, were repaired, and filled with arms and garrisoned with ceaseless vigilance. Stony-faced they were, with dark window holes staring north and east and west, and each window was full of sleepless eyes. Across the mouth of the pass, from cliff to cliff, the Dark Lord had built a rampart of stone. In it there was a single gate of iron, and upon its battlement sentinels paced unceasingly. Beneath the hills on either side, the rock was bored into 100 caves and maggot holes. There a host of orcs lurked, ready at a signal to issue forth like black ants going to war. None could pass the teeth of Mordor and not feel their bite, unless they were summoned by Sauron, or knew the secret passwords that would open the Morannon, the black gate of his land. The two hobbits gazed at the towers and the wall in despair. Even from a distance they could see in the dim light the movement of the black guards upon the wall and the patrols before the gate. They lay now peering over the edge of a rocky hollow beneath the outstretched shadow of the northmost buttress of Effeldwath. Winging the heavy air in a straight flight, a crow, maybe, would have flown but a furlong from their hiding place to the black summit of the nearer tower. A faint smoke curled above it, as if fire smoldered in the hill beneath. Day came, and the fallow sun blinked over the lifeless ridges of arid Lithwy. Then suddenly the cry of brazen-throated trumpets was heard. From the watchtowers they blared, and far away from hidden holds and outposts in the hills came answering calls. And further still, remote but deep and ominous, there echoed in the hollow land beyond the mighty horns and drums of Barad-dûr. Another dreadful day of fear and toil had come to Mordor, and the night guards were summoned to their dungeons and deep halls, and the day guards, evil-eyed and fell, were marching to their posts. Steel gleamed dimly on the battlement. "Well, here we are," said Sam. "Here's the gate, and it looks to me as if that's about as far as we are ever going to get. My word, but the gaffer would have a thing or two to say if he saw me now. Often said I'd come to a bad end if I didn't watch my step. He did. But now I don't suppose I'll ever see the old fellow again. He'll miss his chance of, 'I told you so, Sam.' Where's the pity? He could go on telling me as long as he's got breath, if only I could see his old face again. But I'd have to get a wash first, or he wouldn't know me. I suppose it's no good asking, what way do we go now? We can't go no further, unless we want to ask the orcs for a lift." No, said Gollum. "No use. We can't go further. Smeagol said so. He said, we'll go to the gate, and then we'll see. And we do see. Oh, yes, my precious, we do see. Smeagol knew hobbits could not go this way. Oh, yes, Smeagol knew." "Then what the plague did you bring us here for?" said Sam, not feeling in the mood to be just or reasonable. "Master said so. Master says bring us to the gate, so good Smeagol does so. Master said so, wise master." "I did," said Frodo. His face was grim and set, but resolute. He was filthy, haggard, and pinched with weariness, but he cowered no longer, and his eyes were clear. "I said so because I purpose to enter Mordor, and I know no other way. Therefore I shall go this way. I do not ask anyone to go with me." No, master," wailed Gollum, pawing at him and seeming in great distress. "No use that way. No use. Don't take the precious to him. He'll eat us all if he gets us, eat all the world. Keep it, nice master, and be kind to Smeagol. Don't let him have it. Or go away, go to nice places, and give back a little to Smeagol. Yes, master, give it back, eh? Smeagol will keep it safe. He will do lots of good, especially to nice hobbits. Hobbits, go home. Don't go to the gate." "I am commanded to go to the land of Mordor, and therefore I shall go," said Frodo. "If there is only one way, then I must take it. What comes after must come." Sam said nothing. The look on Frodo's face was enough for him. He knew that words of his were useless. And after all, he never had any real hope in the affair from the beginning. But being a cheerful hobbit, he had not needed hope, as long as despair could be postponed. Now they were come to the bitter end. But he had stuck to his master all the way. That was what he had chiefly come for, and he would still stick to him. His master would not go to Mordor alone. Sam would go with him, and at any rate they would get rid of Gollum. Gollum, however, did not intend to be got rid of yet. He knelt at Frodo's feet, wringing his hands and squeaking. "Not this way, master," he pleaded. "There is another way. Oh, yes, indeed there is. Another way. Darker, more difficult to find, more secret. But Smeagol knows it. Let Smeagol show you." "Another way," said Frodo doubtfully, looking down at Gollum with searching eyes. Yes, indeed. There was another way. Smeagol found it. Let's go and see if it's still there." "You have not spoken of this before." "No, Master did not ask. Master did not say what he meant to do. He did not tell poor Smeagol. He says, Smeagol, take me to the gate, and then goodbye. Smeagol can run away and be good. But now he says, I purpose to enter Mordor this way, so Smeagol is very afraid. He does not want to lose the nice Master, and Master made him promise to save the precious. But Master's going to take it to him, straight to the Black Hand, if Master will go this way. So Smeagol must save them both, and he thinks of another way that there was, once upon a time. Nice Master. Smeagol very good, always helps. Sam frowned. If he could have bored holes in Gollum with his eyes, he would have done. His mind was full of doubt. To all appearances, Gollum was genuinely distressed and anxious to help Frodo. But Sam, remembering the overheard debate, found it hard to believe that the long-submerged Smeagol had come out on top. That voice, at any rate, had not had the last word in the debate. Sam guessed was that the Smeagol and Gollum halves, or what in his mind he called Slinker and Stinker, had made a truce and a temporary alliance. Neither wanted the enemy to get the ring. Both wished to keep Frodo from capture, and under their eye as long as possible, at any rate as long as Stinker had a chance of laying hands on his precious. Whether there really was another way into Mordor, Sam doubted. And it's a good thing neither half of the old villain don't know what Master means to do, he thought. If he knew that Mr. Frodo was trying to put an end to his precious for good and all, there'd be trouble pretty quick, I bet. Anyhow, old Stinker is so frightened of the enemy, and he's under orders of some kind from him, or was, that he'd give us away rather than be caught helping us, and rather than let his precious be melted, maybe. At least that's my idea, and I hope the Master will think out it carefully. He's as wise as any, but he's soft-hearted, that's what he is. It's beyond any Gamgee to guess what he'll do next. Frodo did not answer Gollum at once. While these doubts were passing through Sam's slow but shrewd mind, he stood gazing out towards the dark cliff of Cirith Gorgor. The hollow in which they had taken refuge was delved in the side of a low hill, at some little height above a long trench-like valley that lay between it and the outer buttresses of the mountain wall. In the midst of the valley stood the black foundations of the western watchtower. By morning light the roads had converged upon the gate of Mordor, and could now be seen, pale and dusty, one winding back northwards, another dwindling eastwards into the mists that clung about the feet of arid Lithwi, and a third that ran towards him. As it bent sharply round the tower, it entered a narrow defile and passed not far below the hollow where he stood. Westward to his right it turned, skirting the shadows of the mountain, and went off southward into the deep shadows that mantled all the western side of Ephel-Dwath. Beyond his sight it journeyed on into the narrow land between the mountains and the great river. As he gazed, Frodo became aware that there was a great stir and movement on the plain. It seemed as if whole armies were on the march, though for the most part they were hidden by the reeks and fumes drifting from the fens and wastes beyond. But here and there he caught the gleam of spears and helmets, and over the levels beside the roads horsemen could be seen riding in many companies. He remembered his vision from far upon Amon Hen, so few days before, though now it seemed many years ago. Then he knew that the hope that had for one wild moment stirred in his heart was vain. The trumpets had not rung in challenge, but in greeting. This was no assault upon the dark lord by the men of Gondor, risen like avenging ghosts from the graves of valor long passed away. These were men of other race, out of the wide Eastlands, gathering to the summons of their overlord. Armies that had encamped before his gate by night, and now marched in to swell his mounting power. As if suddenly made fully aware of the peril of their position, alone in the growing light of day, so near to this vast menace, Frodo quickly drew his frail grey hood close upon his head, and stepped down into the dell. Then he turned to Gollum. "Smeagol," he said, "I will trust you once more. Indeed, it seems that I must do so, and that it is my fate to receive help from you where I least looked for it, and your fate to help me whom you long pursued with evil purpose. So far you have deserved well of me, and have kept your promise truly. Truly, I say and mean," he added, with a glance at Sam, "for twice now we have been in your power, and you have done no harm to us, nor have you tried to take from me what you once sought. May the third time prove the best. But I warn you, Smeagol, you are in danger." "Yes, yes, master," said Golem. "Dreadful danger. Smeagol's bones shake to think of it, but he doesn't run away. He must help, nice master." "I did not mean the danger that we all share," said Frodo. "I mean a danger to yourself alone. You swore a promise by what you call the precious. Remember that. It will hold you to it, but it will seek a way to twist it to your own undoing. Already you are being twisted. You revealed yourself to me just now, foolishly. Give it back to Smeagol, you said. Do not say that again. Do not let that thought grow in you. You will never get it back, but the desire of it may betray you to a bitter end. You will never get it back. In the last need, Smeagol, I should put on the precious, and the precious mastered you long ago. If I, wearing it, were to command you, you would obey, even if it were to leap from a precipice or to cast yourself into the fire. And such would be my command. So have a care, Smeagol." Sam looked at his master with approval, but also with surprise. There was a look in his face and a tone in his voice that he had not known before. It had always been a notion of his that the kindness of dear Mr. Frodo was of such high degree that it must imply a fair measure of blindness. Of course, he also firmly held the incompatible belief that Mr. Frodo was the wisest person in the world, with the possible exception of old Mr. Bilbo and of Gandalf. Gollum, in his own way, and with much more excuse as his acquaintance was much briefer, may have made a similar mistake, confusing kindness and blindness. At any rate, this speech abashed and terrified him. He grovelled on the ground and could speak no clear words but, "Nice, master." Frodo waited patiently for a while. Then he spoke again, less sternly. "Come now, Gollum or Smeagol, if you wish. Tell me of this other way, and show me, if you can, what hope there is in it, enough to justify me in turning aside from my plain path. I am in haste." But Gollum was in a pitiable state, and Frodo's threat had quite unnerved him. It was not easy to get any clear account out of him, amid his mumblings and squeakings, and the frequent interruptions in which he crawled on the floor and begged them both to be kind to "poor little Smeagol." After a while he grew a little calmer, and Frodo gathered bit by bit that, if a traveller followed the road that turned west of Etheldwath, he would come in time to a crossing in a circle of dark trees. On the right a road went down to Osgiliath and the bridges of the Anduin. In the middle of the road went on southward. On, said Gollum. "We never went that way, but they say it goes 100 leagues, until you can see the great water that is never still. There are lots of fishes there, and big birds eat fishes. Nice birds, but we never went there, alas no, we never had a chance. And further still there are more lands, they say, but the yellow face is very hot there, and there are seldom any clouds, and the men are fierce and have dark faces. We do not want to see that land." "No," said Frodo, "but do not wander from your road. What of the third turning?" Oh yes, there is a third way," said Gollum. "That is the road to the left. At once it begins to climb up, winding and climbing back towards the dark shadows. When it turns round the black rock, you'll see it. Suddenly you'll see it above you, and you'll want to hide." See it? What will you see?" "The old fortress, very old, very horrible now. We used to hear tales from the south when Smeagol was young, long ago. Oh yes, we used to tell lots of tales in the evening, sitting by the banks of the great river, in the willow lands when the river was younger too. He began to weep and mutter. The hobbits waited patiently. Tales out of the south, Gollum went on again, about the tall men with the shining eyes and their houses like hills of stone, and the silver crown of their king and his white tree. Wonderful tales. They built very tall towers, and one they raised like silver white, and in it was a stone like the moon, and round it were great white walls. Oh yes, there were many tales about the Tower of the Moon. That would be Minas Ithil, that Isildur, the son of Elendil, built, said Frodo. It was Isildur who cut off the finger of the enemy. Yes, he has only 4 on the black hand, but they are enough, said Gollum, shuddering. And he hated Isildur's city. What does he not hate, said Frodo. But what has the Tower of the Moon to do with us? Well, master, there it was, and there it is, the tall tower and the white houses and the wall. But not nice now, not beautiful. He conquered it long ago. It is a very terrible place now. Travelers shiver when they see it. They creep out of sight. They avoid its shadow. But master will have to go that way. That is the only other way. For the mountains are lower there, and the old road goes up and up until it reaches a dark pass at the top, and then it goes down, down again, to Gorgoroth. His voice sank to a whisper, and he shuddered. But how will that help us? Asked Sam. Surely the enemy knows all about his own mountains, and the road will be guarded as close as this. The tower isn't empty, is it? Oh no, not empty, whispered Gollum. It seems empty, but it isn't. Oh no, very dreadful things live there. Orcs, yes, always orcs. But worse things live there too. The road climbs right under the shadow of the walls and passes the gate. Nothing moves on the road that they don't know about. The things inside know, the silent watchers. So that's your advice, is it? Said Sam. That we should go another long march south to find ourselves in the same fix or a worse one when we get there, if we ever do? No, no indeed, said Gollum. Hobbits must see, must try to understand. He does not expect attack that way. His eye is all round, but it attends more to some places than to others. He can't see everything all at once. Not yet. You see, he has conquered all the country west of the shadowy mountains down to the river, and he holds the bridges now. He thinks no one can come to the moon tower without fighting big battle at the bridges, or getting lots of boats which they cannot hide and he will know about. You seem to know a lot about what he's doing and thinking, said Sam. Have you been talking to him lately, or just hobnobbing with orcs? Not nice, hobbit, not sensible, said Gollum, giving Sam an angry glance and turning to Frodo. Smeagol has talked to orcs, yes, of course, before he met Master, and to many people. He has walked very far, and what he says now many people are saying. It's here in the north that the big danger is for him, and for us. He will come out of the Black Gate one day soon. That is the only way big armies can come. But away down west he is not afraid, and there are the silent watchers. Just so, said Sam, not to be put off. And so we are to walk up and knock at their gate and ask if we're on the right road to Mordor? Or are they too silent to answer? It's not sense. We might as well do it here and save ourselves a long tramp. Don't make jokes about it, hissed Gollum. It isn't funny. Oh no, not amusing. It's not sense to try and get into Mordor at all. But if Master says I must go, or I will go, then he must try some way. But he must not go to the terrible city. Oh no, of course not. That is where Smeagol helps. Nice Smeagol, though no one tells him what it is about. Smeagol helps again. He found it. He knows it. What did you find? Asked Frodo. Gollum crouched down, and his voice sank to a whisper again. A little path leading up into the mountains, and then a stair, a narrow stair. Oh yes, very long and narrow. And then more stairs, and then... His voice sank even lower. A tunnel, a dark tunnel, at last a little cleft, and a path high above the main pass. It was that way that Smeagol got out of the darkness. But it was years ago. The path may have vanished now. But perhaps not. Perhaps not. I don't like the sound of it at all, said Sam. Sounds too easy at any rate in the telling. If that path is still there, it'll be guarded too. Wasn't it guarded, Gollum? As he said this, he caught, or fancied he caught, a green gleam in Gollum's eye. Gollum muttered, but did not reply. Is it not guarded? Asked Frodo sternly. And did you escape out of the darkness, Smeagol? Were you not rather permitted to depart upon an errand? That at least is what Aragorn thought, who found you by the dead marshes some years ago. It's a lie, hissed Gollum, and an evil light came into his eyes at the naming of Aragorn. He lied on me, yes he did. I did escape, all by my poor self. Indeed, I was told to seek for the precious, and I have searched and searched, of course I have. But not for the black one. The precious was ours. It was mine, I tell you. I did escape. Frodo felt a strange certainty that in this matter Gollum was for once not so far from the truth as might be suspected, that he had somehow found a way out of Mordor, and at least believed that it was by his own cunning. For one thing, he noted that Gollum used I, and that seemed usually to be a sign, on its rare appearances, that some remnants of old truth and sincerity were for the moment on top. But even if Gollum could be trusted on this point, Frodo did not forget the wiles of the enemy. The escape may have been allowed or arranged, and well known in the Dark Tower, and in any case Gollum was plainly keeping a good deal back. I ask you again, he said, is not this secret way guarded? But the name of Aragorn had put Gollum into a sullen mood. He had all the injured air of a liar suspected when for once he has told the truth, or part of it. He did not answer. Is it not guarded? Frodo repeated. Yes, perhaps. No safe places in this country, said Gollum sulkily. No safe places, but Master must try it or go home. No other way. They could not get him to say more. The name of the perilous place and the high pass he could not tell or would not. Its name was Cirith Ungol, a name of dreadful rumor. Aragorn could perhaps have told them that name and its significance. Gandalf would have warned them. But they were alone, and Aragorn was far away, and Gandalf stood amid the ruin of Isengard and strove with Saruman, delayed by reason. Yet even as he spoke his last words to Saruman, and the Palantir crashed in fire upon the steps of Orthanc, his thought was ever upon Frodo and Samwise, over the long leagues his mind sought for them in hope and pity. Maybe Frodo felt it, not knowing, as he had upon Ammon Hen, even though he believed that Gandalf was gone forever into the shadow in Moria far away. He sat upon the ground for a long while, silent, his head bowed, striving to recall all that Gandalf had said to him. But for this choice he could recall no counsel. Indeed, Gandalf's guidance had been taken from them too soon while the dark land was still very far away. How they should enter it at the last Gandalf had not said. Perhaps he could not say. Into the stronghold of the enemy in the north, into Dol Guldur, he had once ventured, but into Mordor, to the Mountain of Fire, and to Barad-dûr, since the Dark Lord rose in power again, had he ever journeyed there? Frodo did not think so. And here he was, a little halfling from the Shire, a simple hobbit of the quiet countryside, expected to find a way where the great ones could not go, or dared not go. It was an evil fate, but he had taken it on himself in his own sitting room in the far-off spring of another year, so remote now that it was like a chapter in a story of the world's youth, when the trees of silver and gold were still in bloom. This was an evil choice. Which way should he choose? And if both led to terror and death, what good lay in choices? The day drew on. A deep silence fell upon the little grey hollow where they lay, so near to the borders of the land of fear. A silence that could be felt, as if it were a thick veil that cut them off from all the world about them. Above them was a dome of pale sky barred with fleeting smoke, but it seemed high and far away, as if seen through great deeps of air heavy with brooding thought. Not even an eagle poised against the sun would have marked the hobbits sitting there, under the weight of doom, silent, not moving, shrouded in their thin gray cloaks. For a moment he might have paused to consider Gollum, a tiny figure sprawling on the ground. There, perhaps, lay the famished skeleton of some child of men, its ragged garments still clinging to it, its long arms and legs almost bone white and bone thin, no flesh worth a peck. Frodo's head was bowed over his knees, but Sam leaned back, with hands behind his head, staring out of his hood at the empty sky. At least for a long while it was empty. Then presently Sam thought he saw a dark bird-like figure wheel into the circle of his sight, and hover, and then wheel away again. 2 more followed, and then a 4th. They were very small to look at, yet he knew somehow that they were huge, with a vast stretch of pinion flying at a great height. He covered his eyes and bent forward, cowering. The same warning of fear was on him as he had felt in the presence of the Black Riders, the helpless horror that had come with the cry and the wind and the shadow on the moon, though now it was not so crushing or compelling. The menace was more remote, but menace it was. Frodo felt it too. His thought was broken. He stirred and shivered, but he did not look up. Gollum huddled himself together like a cornered spider. The winged shapes wheeled and stooped swiftly down, speeding back to Mordor. Sam took a deep breath. "The riders are up again, up in the air," he said in a hoarse whisper. "I saw them. Do you think they could see us? They were very high up, and if they are Black Riders, same as before, then they can't see much by daylight, can they?" "No, perhaps not," said Frodo, "but their steeds could see, and these winged creatures that they ride on now, they could probably see more than any other creature. They are like great carrion birds. They are looking for something. The enemy is on the watch, I fear." The feeling of dread passed, but the enfolding silence was broken. For some time they had been cut off from the world as if in an invisible island. Now they were laid bare again. Peril had returned, but still Frodo did not speak to Gollum or make his choice. His eyes were closed as if he were dreaming, or looking inward into his heart and memory. At last he stirred and stood up, and it seemed he was about to speak and to decide. But, "Hark," he said, "what is that?" A new fear was upon them. They heard singing and hoarse shouting. At first it seemed a long way off, but it drew nearer. It was coming towards them. It leapt into all their minds like the black wings had spied them, and had sent armed servants to seize them. No speed seemed too great for these servants of Sauron. They crouched, listening. The voices and the clink of weapons and harness were very close. Frodo and Sam loosened their small swords in their sheaths. Flight was impossible. Gollum rose slowly and crawled insect-like to the lip of the hollow. Very cautiously he raised himself inch by inch until he could peer over it between 2 broken points of stone. He remained there without moving for some time, making no sound. Presently the voices began to recede again, and then they slowly faded away. Far off a horn blew on the ramparts of the Morannon. Then quietly Gollum drew back and slipped down into the hollow. "More men going to Mordor," he said in a low voice. "Dark faces. We have not seen men like these before. No, Smeagol has not. They are fierce. They have black eyes and long black hair and gold rings in their ears. Yes, lots of beautiful gold. And some have red paint on their cheeks and red cloaks. and their flags are red and the tips of their spears, and they have round shields, yellow and black with big spikes. Not nice. Very cruel, wicked men they look. Almost as bad as orcs, and much bigger. Smeagol thinks they have come out of the south, beyond the great river's end. They came up that road. They have passed on to the Black Gate, but more may follow. Always more people coming to Mordor. One day all the peoples will be inside. Were there any Oliphants? Asked Sam, forgetting his fear and his eagerness for news of strange places. No Oliphants. What are Oliphants? Said Gollum. Sam stood up, putting his hands behind his back, as he always did when speaking poetry, and began. Gray as a mouse, big as a house, nose like a snake, I make the earth shake. As I tramp through the grass, trees crack as I pass, with horns in my mouth, I walk in the south. Flapping big ears, beyond count of years, I stump round and round, never lie on the ground. Not even to die, Oliphant am I, biggest of all, huge, old, and tall. If ever you'd met me, you'd never forget me. If you never do, you won't think I'm true. But old Oliphant am I, and I never lie. That, said Sam, when he had finished reciting, that's a rhyme we have in the Shire. Nonsense maybe, and maybe not. But we have our tales too, and news out of the south, you know. In the old days, hobbits used to go on their travels now and again. Not that many ever came back, and not that all they said was believed. News from Bree, and not sure as Shire talk, as the sayings go. But I've heard tales of the big folk down away in the Sunlands. Swirting, we call 'em in our tales, and they ride on Oliphants, 'tis said, when they fight. They put houses and towers on the Oliphants' backs and all, and the Oliphants throw rocks and trees at one another. So when you said men out of the south, all in red and gold, I said, were there any Oliphants? For if there was, I was going to take a look, risk or no. But now I don't suppose I'll ever see an Oliphant. Maybe there ain't no such beast. He sighed. No Oliphants, said Gollum again. Smeagol has not heard of them. He does not want to see them. He does not want to be them. Smeagol wants to go away from here and hide somewhere safe. Smeagol wants Nice Master to go. Nice Master's, won't he come with Smeagol? Frodo stood up. He had laughed in the midst of all his cares when Sam trotted out the old fireside rhyme of Oliphant, and the laugh had released him from hesitation. I wish we had 1,000 Oliphants with Gandalf on a white one at their head, he said. Then we'd break away into this evil land, perhaps. But we've not. Just our own tired legs, that's all. Well, Smeagol, the third turn may turn the best. I will come with you. Good master, wise master, nice master, cried Gollum in delight, patting Frodo's knees. Good master. Then rest now, nice hobbits, under the shadow of the stones. Close under the stones. Rest and lie quiet till the yellow face goes away. Then we can go quickly. Soft and quick as shadows we must be. Chapter 5. Of Herb and Stewed Rabbit. For the few hours of daylight that were left, they rested, shifting into the shade as the sun moved, until at last the shadow of the western rim of their dell grew long, and darkness filled all the hollow. Then they ate a little and drank sparingly. Gollum ate nothing, but he accepted water gladly. Soon get more now, he said, licking his lips. Good water runs down in streams to the great river. Nice water in the lands we are going to. Smeagol will get food there too, perhaps. He's very hungry, yes. He set his 2 large flat hands on his shrunken belly, and a pale green light came into his eyes. The dusk was deep when at length they set out, creeping over the westward rim of the dell, and fading like ghosts into the broken country on the borders of the road. The moon was now 3 nights from the full, but it did not climb over the mountains until nearly midnight, and the early night was very dark. A single red light burned high up in the towers of the Teeth, but otherwise no sign could be seen or heard of the sleepless watch on the Morannon. For many miles the red eye seemed to stare at them as they fled, stumbling through a barren, stony country. They did not dare to take the road, but they kept it on their left, following its line as well as they could at a little distance. At last, when night was growing old and they were already weary, for they had taken only one short rest, the eye dwindled to a small fiery point and then vanished. They had turned the dark northern shoulder of the lower mountains and were heading southwards. With hearts strangely lightened, they now rested again, but not for long. They were not going quick enough for Golem. By his reckoning, it was nearly 30 leagues from the Morannon to the crossroads above Oscalaith, and he hoped to cover that distance in 4 journeys. So soon they struggled on once more, until the dawn began to spread slowly in the wide grey solitude. They had then walked almost 8 leagues, and the hobbits could not have gone any further, even if they had dared. The growing light revealed to them a land already less barren and ruinous. The mountains still loomed up ominously on their left, but near at hand they could see the southward road, now bearing away from the black roots of the hills and slanting westwards. Beyond it were slopes covered with sombre trees like dark clouds, but all about them lay a tumbled heathland, grown with ling and broom and cornel, and other shrubs that they did not know. Here and there they saw knots of tall pine trees. The hearts of the hobbits rose again a little in spite of weariness. The air was fresh and fragrant, and it reminded them of the uplands of the North Farthing far away. It seemed good to be reprieved, to walk in a land that had only been for a few years under the dominion of the Dark Lord and was not yet fallen wholly into decay. But they did not forget their danger, nor the black gate that was still all too near, hidden though it was behind the gloomy heights. They looked about for a hiding place where they could shelter from evil eyes until the light lasted. The day passed uneasily. They lay deep in the heather and counted out the slow hours, in which there seemed little change, for they were still under the shadows of the Ethel Dwath, and the sun was veiled. Frodo slept at times, deeply and peacefully, either trusting Golem or too tired to trouble about him, but Sam found it difficult to do more than doze, even when Golem was plainly fast asleep, whiffling and twitching in his secret dreams. Hunger, perhaps, more than mistrust, kept him wakeful. He had begun to long for a good homely meal, something hot out of the pot. As soon as the land faded into a formless gray under coming night, they started out again. In a little while Golem led them down on the southward road, and after that they went on more quickly, though the danger was greater. Their ears were strained for the sound of hoof or foot on the road ahead, or following them from behind, but the night passed, and they heard no sound of walker or rider. The road had been made in a long-lost time, and for perhaps 30 miles below the Morannon it had been newly repaired, but as it went south, the wild encroached upon it. The handiwork of men of old could still be seen in its straight, sure flight and level course. Now and again it cut its way through hillside slopes, or leapt over a stream upon a wide shapely arc of enduring masonry. But at last all signs of stonework faded, save for a broken pillar here and there, peering out of bushes at the side, or old paving stones still lurking amid weeds and stones. Heather and trees and bracken scrambled down and overhung the banks, or sprawled out over the surface. It dwindled at last to a country cart road little used, but it did not wind. It held its own sure course and guided them by the swiftest way. So they passed into the northern marches of that land that men once called Ithilien, a fair country of climbing woods and swift-falling streams. The night became fine under star and round moon, and it seemed to the hobbits that the fragrance of the air grew as they went forward, and from the blowing and muttering of Gollum it seemed that he noticed it too, and did not relish it. At the first signs of day they halted again. They had come to the end of a long cutting, deep and sheer-sided in the middle, by which the road clove its way through a stony ridge. Now they climbed up the westward bank and looked abroad. Day was opening in the sky, and they saw that the mountains were now much further off, receding eastward in a long curve that was lost in the distance. Before them, as they turned west, gentle slopes ran down into dim hazes far below. All about them were small woods of resinous trees, fir and cedar and cypress, and other kinds unknown in the Shire, with wide glades among them, and everywhere there was a wealth of sweet-smelling herbs and shrubs. The long journey from Rivendell had brought them far south of their own land, but not until now in this more sheltered region had the hobbits felt the change of clime. Here spring was already busy about them. Fronds pierced moss and mold. Larches were green busy about them. Small flowers were opening in the turf. Birds were singing. Ithilien, the garden of Gondor, now desolate, kept still a disheveled dryad loveliness. South and west it looked towards the warm lower vales of Anduin, shielded from the east by the Ethel Dwath, and yet not under the mountain shadow, protected from the north by Emyn open to the southern air and the moist winds from the sea far away. Many great trees grew there, planted long ago, falling into untended age amid a riot of careless descendants, and groves and thickets were full of tamarisk and pungent terebinth, of olive and of bay, and there were junipers and myrtles, and thymes that grew in bushes, or with their woody creeping stems mantled in deep tapestries the hidden stones, sages of many kinds putting forth blue flowers, or red, or pale green, and marjorams and new-sprouting parsleys, and many herbs of forms and scents beyond the garden lore of Sam. The grots and rocky walls were already starred with saxifrages and stonecrops. Primroses and anemones were awake in the filbert brakes, and asphodel and many lily flowers nodded their half-opened heads in the grass. Deep green grass beside the pools where falling streams halted in cool hollows on their journey down to Anduin. The travelers turned their backs on the road and went downhill. As they walked, brushing their way through bush and herb, sweet odors rose about them. Gollum coughed and retched, but the hobbits breathed deep, and suddenly Sam laughed, for heart's ease, not for jest. They followed a stream that went quickly down before them. Presently it brought them to a small clear lake in a shallow dell. It lay in the broken ruins of an ancient stone basin, the cavern rim of which was almost wholly covered with mosses and rose brambles. Iris swords stood in ranks about it, and water-lily leaves floated on its dark, gently rippling surface, but it was deep and fresh, and spilled ever softly over a stony lip at the far end. Here they washed themselves and drank their fill at the infalling fresher. Then they sought for a resting place and a hiding place, for this land, fair-seeming still, was none the less now territory of the enemy. They had not come very far from the road, and yet even in so short a space they had seen scars of the old wars, and the newer wounds made by the orcs and other foul servants of the Dark Lord. A pit of uncovered filth and refuse, trees hewn down wantonly and left to die, with evil runes or the fell sign of the eye cut in rude strokes on their bark. Sam scrambled below the outfall of the lake, smelling and touching the unfamiliar plants and trees, forgetful for the moment of Mordor, was suddenly reminded of their ever-present peril. He stumbled on a ring still scorched by fire, and in the midst of it he found a pile of charred and broken bones and skulls. The swift growth of the wild with briar and eglantine and trailing clematis was already drawing a veil over this place of dreadful fear and slaughter, but it was not ancient. He hurried back to his companions, but he said nothing. The bones were best left in peace and not pawed and rooted by Golem. "Let's find a place to lie up," he said. "Not lower down. Higher up for me." A little way back above the lake they found a deep brown bed of last year's fern. Beyond it was a thicket of dark-leaved bay trees climbing up a steep bank that was crowned with old cedars. Here they decided to rest and pass the day, which already promised to be bright and warm. A good day for strolling on their way among the groves and glades of Italy. But though orcs may shun the sunlight, there were too many places here where they could lie hid and watch, and other evil eyes were abroad. Sauron had many servants. Golem, in any case, would not move under the yellow face. Soon it would look over the dark ridges of the Dwath, and he would soon faint and cower in the light and heat. Sam had given earnest thought to food as they marched. Now that the despair of the impassable gate was behind him, he did not feel so inclined as his master to take no thought for their livelihood beyond the end of their errand. And anyways it seemed wiser to him to save the waybread for the elves, for worse times ahead. 6 days or more had passed since he reckoned that they had only a bare supply for 3 weeks. If we reach the fire in that time, we'll be lucky at this rate, he thought again. And we might be wanting to get back. We might. Besides, at the end of a long night march, and after bathing and drinking, he felt more hungry than usual. A supper or a breakfast by the fire in the old kitchen at Bagshot Row was what he really wanted. An idea struck him, and he turned to Golem. Golem had just begun to sneak off on his own, and he was crawling away on all fours through the fern. "Hi, Golem," said Sam. "Where are you going? Hunting?" "Well, see here, old noser, you don't like our food, and I'd not be sorry for a change myself. Your new motto's always ready to help. Could you find anything fit for a hungry hobbit?" "Yes, perhaps, yes," said Golem. "Smeagol always helps if they asks. If they asks nicely." "Right," said Sam. "I does ask. And if that isn't nice enough, I begs." Golem disappeared. He was away some time, and Frodo, after a few mouthfuls of lumbus, settled down into the brown fern and went to sleep. Sam looked at him. The early daylight was only just creeping down into the shadows under the trees, but he saw his master's face very clearly, and his hands, too, lying at rest on the ground beside him. He was reminded suddenly of Frodo as he had lain asleep in the house of Elrond after his deadly wound. Then, as he had kept watch, Sam had noticed that at times a light seemed to be shining faintly within, but now the light was even clearer and stronger. Frodo's face was peaceful. The marks of fear and care had left it, but it looked old and beautiful, as if the chiseling of the shaping years was now revealed in many fine lines that had before been hidden, though the identity of the face had not changed. Not that Sam Gamgee put it that way to himself. He shook his head, as if finding words useless, and murmured, "I love him. He's like that, and sometimes it shines through, somehow. But I love him, whether or no." Golem returned quietly and peered over Sam's shoulder. Looking at Frodo, he shut his eyes and crawled away without a sound. Sam came to a moment later and found him chewing something and muttering to himself. On the ground beside him lay 2 small rabbits, which he was beginning to eye greedily. "Smeagol always helps," he said. "He has brought rabbits, nice rabbits, but Master's gone to sleep, and perhaps Sam wants to sleep. Doesn't want rabbits now? Smeagol tries to help, but he can't catch things all in a minute." Sam, however, had no objection to rabbit at all, and he said so. At least not to cooked rabbit. All hobbits, of course, can cook, if they begin to learn the art before their letters, which many never reach. But Sam was a good cook, even by hobbit reckoning, and he had done a good deal of the camp cooking on their travels when there was a chance. He still hopefully carried some of his gear in his pack, a small tinder box, two small shallow pans, the smaller fitting into the larger, inside them a wooden spoon. A short two-pronged fork and some skewers were stowed, and hidden at the bottom of the pack, in a flat wooden box, a dwindling treasure, some salt. But he needed a fire and some other things. He thought for a bit while he took out his knife, cleaned and wetted it, and began to dress the rabbits. He was not going to leave Frodo alone asleep even for a few minutes. "Now, Gollum," he said, "I've another job for you. Go and fill these pans with water and bring 'em back." "Smeagol will fetch water, yes," said Gollum. "But what does the hobbit want all that water for? He is drunk and he is washed." "Never you mind," said Sam. "If you can't guess, you'll soon find out. And the sooner you fetch the water, the sooner you'll learn. Don't you damage one of my pans, or I'll carve you into mincemeat." While Gollum was away, Sam took another look at Frodo. He was still sleeping quietly, but Sam was now struck most by the leanness of his face and hands. "Too thin and drawn he is," he muttered. "Not right for a hobbit. If I can get these conies cooked, I'm going to wake him." Sam gathered a pile of the driest fern, and then scrambled up the bank, collecting a bundle of twigs and broken wood. The fallen branch of a cedar at the top gave him a good supply. He cut out some turves at the foot of the bank, just outside the fern brake, and made a shallow hole and laid his fuel in it. Being handy with flint and tinder, he soon had a small blaze going. It made little or no smoke, but gave off an aromatic scent. He was just swooping over this fire, shielding it and building it up with heavier wood, when Gollum returned, carrying the pans carefully and grumbling to himself. He set the pans down and then suddenly saw what Sam was doing. He gave a thin, hissing shriek and seemed to be both frightened and angry. "No," he cried. "No, silly hobbits, foolish, yes, foolish. They mustn't do it." "Mustn't do what?" asked Sam in surprise. "Not make the nasty red tongues," hissed Gollum. "Fire, fire, it's dangerous, yes it is. It burns, it kills, and it will bring enemies, yes it will." "I don't think so," said Sam. "Don't see why it should, if you don't put wet stuff on it and make it smother. But if it does, it does. I'm going to risk it anyhow. I'm going to stew these conies." "Stew the rabbits?" squealed Gollum in dismay. "Spoil beautiful meat Smeagol saved for you? Poor hungry Smeagol! What for? What for, silly hobbit? They are young, they are tender, they are nice. Eat them, eat them." He clawed at the nearest rabbit, already skinned and lying by the fire. Now," said Sam, "each to his own fashion. Our bread chokes you, and raw coney chokes me. If you give me a coney, the coney's mine. See to cook, if I have a mind, and I have. You needn't watch me. Go and catch another and eat it as you fancy, somewhere private and out of my sight. Then you won't see the fire, and I shan't see you, and we'll both be happier. I'll see the fire don't smoke, if that's any comfort to you." Gollum withdrew grumbling and crawled into the fern. Sam busied himself with his pans. "What a hobbit needs with coney," he said to himself, "is some herbs and roots, especially taters, not to mention bread. Herbs we can manage, seemingly." "Gollum," he called softly. "Third time pays for all. I want some herbs." Gollum's head peeped out of the fern, but his looks were neither helpful nor friendly. "A few bay leaves, some thyme and sage will do, before the water boils," said Sam. "No," said Gollum. "Smeagol is not pleased, and Smeagol doesn't like smelly leaves. He doesn't eat grasses or roots, no precious, not till he's starving or very sick, poor Smeagol. Smeagol will get into real, true hot water when this water boils if he doesn't do as he's asked," growled Sam. "Sam will put his head in it, yes, precious, and then make him look for turnips and carrots and taters, too, if it was the time of year. But there's all sorts of good things running wild in this country. I'd give a lot for half a dozen taters." "Smeagol won't go. Oh, no, precious, not this time," hissed Gollum. "He's frightened, and he's very tired, and this hobbit's not nice at all. Smeagol won't grub for roots and carrots and taters. What's taters, precious, What's taters?" "Potatoes," said Sam. The gaffer's delight, and rare good ballast for an empty belly. But you won't find any, so you needn't look. But be good, Smeagol, and fetch me the herbs, and I'll think better of you. What's more, if you turn over a new leaf and keep it turned, I'll cook you some taters one of these days, I will. Fried fish and chips, served by S. Gamgee. You couldn't say no to that. Yes, we could. Spoiling nice fish, scorching it. Give me fish now, and keep nasty chips. Oh, you're hopeless, said Sam. Go to sleep. In the end, he had to find what he wanted for himself, but he did not have to go far, not out of sight of the place where his master lay, still sleeping. For a while Sam sat musing and tending the fire till the water boiled. The daylight grew and the air became warm. The dew faded off turf and leaf. Soon the rabbits, cut up, lay simmering in their pans with the bunched herbs. Almost Sam fell asleep as the time went by. He let them stew for close on an hour, testing them now and again with his fork and tasting the broth. When he thought all was ready, he lifted the pans off the fire and crept along to Frodo. Frodo half opened his eyes at Sam, stood over him, and then he awakened from his dreaming, another gentle, unrecoverable dream of peace. "Hello, Sam," he said. "Not resting? Is anything wrong? What is the time?" "About a couple of hours after daybreak," said Sam, "and nigh on 8:30 by Shire clocks, maybe. But nothing's wrong, though it ain't quite what I'd call right. No stock, no onions, no taters. I've got a bit of a stew for you, and some broth, Mr. Frodo. Do you good. You'll have to sup it in your mug, or straight from the pan, when it's cooled a bit. I haven't brought no bowls, nor nothing proper." Frodo yawned and stretched. "You should have been resting, Sam," he said, "and lighting a fire was dangerous in these parts. But I do feel hungry. Can I smell it from here? What have you stewed?" "A present from Smeagol," said Sam. "A bracky young conies, though I fancy Golem's regretting them now. But there's naught to do with them but a few herbs." Sam and his master sat within the fernbrake and ate their stew from the pans, sharing the old fork and spoon. They allowed themselves half a piece of the elvish waybread each. It seemed a feast. "Whew! Golem," Sam called and whistled softly. "Come on, still time to change your mind. There's some left if you want to try stewed coney." There was no answer. "Oh well, I suppose he's gone off to find something for himself. We'll finish it," said Sam. "And then you must take some sleep," said Frodo. "Don't you drop off while I'm nodding, Mr. Frodo. I don't feel too sure of him. There's a good deal of stinker, the bad Golem, if you understand me, in him still, and it's getting stronger again. Not but what I think he'd try to throttle me first now. We don't see eye to eye, and he's not pleased with Sam. Oh, no, precious, not pleased at all." They finished, and Sam went off to the stream to rinse his gear. As he stood up to return, he looked back up the slope. At the moment, he saw the sun rise out of the reek, or haze, or dark shadow, or whatever it was, that lay ever to the east, and it sent its golden beams down upon the trees and glades about him. Then he noticed a thin spiral of blue-gray smoke, plain to see as it caught the sunlight, rising from a thicket above him. With a shock, he realized that this was the smoke from his little cooking fire, which he had neglected to put out. "That won't do. I never thought it would show like that," he muttered, and he started to hurry back. Suddenly he halted and listened. Had he heard a whistle or not? Or was it the call of some strange bird? If it was a whistle, it did not come from Frodo's direction. There it went again, from another place. Sam began to run as well as he could uphill. He found that a small brand, burning away to its outer end, had kindled some fern at the edge of the fire, and the fern blazing up had set the turves smoldering. Hastily he stamped out what was left of the fire, scattered the ashes, and laid the turves on the hole. Then he crept back to Frodo. "Did you hear a whistle, and what sounded like an answer?" he asked. "A few minutes back. I hope it was only a bird, but it didn't sound quite like that. More like somebody mimicking a bird call, I thought. And I'm afraid my bit of the fire's been smoldering. Now if I've gone and brought trouble, I'll never forgive myself, nor won't have a chance, maybe. "Hush," whispered Frodo. "I thought I heard voices." The two hobbits trussed their small packs, put them on ready for flight, and then crawled deeper into the fern. There they crouched, listening. There was no doubt of the voices. They were speaking low and furtively, but they were near and coming nearer. Then quite suddenly one spoke, closely at hand. Here is where the smoke came from," it said. "'Twill be nigh at hand, in the fern, no doubt. We shall have it like a coney in a trap. Then we shall learn what kind of thing it is." "Aye, and what it knows," said a second voice. At once 4 men came striding through the fern from different directions. Since flight and hiding were no longer possible, Frodo and Sam sprang to their feet, putting back to back and whipping out their small swords. If they were astonished at what they saw, their captors were even more astonished. 4 tall men stood there. 2 had spears in their hands with broad, bright heads. 2 had great bows, almost of their own height, and great quivers of long, green feathered arrows. All had swords at their sides, and were clad in green and brown of varied hues, as if the better to walk unseen in the glades of Ithilien. Green gauntlets covered their hands, and their faces were hooded and masked with green, except for their eyes, which were very keen and bright. At once Frodo thought of Boromir, for these men were like him in stature and bearing, and in their manner of speech. "We have not found what we sought," said one, "but what have we found?" "Not orcs," said another, releasing the hilt of his sword, which he had seized when he saw the glitter of sting in Frodo's hand. "Elves?" said a third doubtfully. "Nay, not elves," said the fourth, the tallest, and it appeared the chief among them. "Elves do not walk in Ithilien these days, and elves are wondrous fair to look upon, or so 'tis said." "Meaning we're not, I take you," said Sam. "Thank you kindly. And when you've finished discussing us, perhaps you'll say who you are, and why you can't let 2 tired travelers rest." The tall green men laughed grimly. "I am Faramir, captain of Gondor," he said. "But there are no travelers in this land, only the servants of the Dark Tower or the White." "But we are neither," said Frodo, "and travelers we are, whatever Captain Faramir may say." "Then make haste to declare yourselves and your errand," said Faramir. "We have our work to do, and this is no time or place for riddling or parleying. Come, where's the third of your party?" "The third?" "Yes, the skulking fellow that we saw with his nose in the pool down yonder. He had an ill-favored look. Some spying breed of orc, I guess, or a creature of theirs. But he gave us the slip by some fox trick." "I do not know where he is," said Frodo. "He is only a chance companion met upon our road, and I am not answerable for him. If you come on him, spare him. Bring him or send him to us. He is only a wretched gangrel creature, but I have him under my care for a while. But as for us, we are hobbits of the Shire, far to the north and west, beyond many rivers. Frodo, son of Drogo, is my name, and with me is Samwise, son of Hamfast, a worthy hobbit in my service. We have come by long ways, out of Rivendell, or Imladris, as some call it." Here Faramir stared and grew intent. 7 companions we had. One we lost at Moria, the others we left at Parth Galen above Rauros. 2 of my kin, a dwarf there was also, and an elf, and 2 men. They were Aragorn and Boromir, who said that he came out of Minas Tirith, a city in the south. "Boromir!" all 4 men exclaimed. "Boromir, son of the Lord Denethor," said Faramir, and a strange, stern look came into his face. "You came with him? That is news indeed, if it be true. Know, little strangers, that Boromir, son of Denethor, was High Warden of the White Tower, and our Captain General. Sorely do we miss him. Who are you, then, and what had you to do with him? Be swift, for the sun is climbing." "Are riddling words known to you that Boromir brought to Rivendell?" Frodo replied. "Seek for the sword that was broken. In Imladris it dwells." "The words are known indeed," said Faramir in astonishment. It is some token of your truth that you also know them. Aragorn, whom I named, is the bearer of the sword that was broken, said Frodo, and we are the halflings that the rhyme spoke of. That I see, said Faramir thoughtfully, or I see that it might be so. And what is Isildur's bane? That it is hidden, answered Frodo. Doubtless it will be made clear in time. We must learn more of this, said Faramir, and know what brings you so far east under the shadow of yonder. He pointed and said no name. But not now. We have business in hand. You are in peril, and you would not have gone far by field or road this day. There will be hard hand-strokes nigh at hand ere the day is full, then death or swift flight back to Anduin. I will leave two to guard you, for your good and for mine. Wise man trusts not to chance meeting on the road in this land. If I return, I will speak more with you. Farewell, said Frodo, bowing low. Think what you will, I am a friend of all enemies of the one enemy. We would go with you if we halfling folk could hope to serve you, such doughty men and strong as you seem, and if my errand permitted it. May the light shine on your swords. The halflings are courteous folk, whatever else they be, said Faramir. Farewell. The hobbits sat down again, but they said nothing to one another of their thoughts and doubts. Close by, just under the dappling shadow of the dark bay trees, two men remained on guard. They took off their masks now and again to cool them, as the day heat grew, and Frodo saw that they were goodly men, pale-skinned, dark of hair, with grey eyes and faces sad and proud. They spoke together in soft voices, at first using the common speech, but after the manner of older days, and then changing to another language of their own. To his amazement, as he listened, Frodo became aware that it was the elven tongue that they spoke, or one but little different, and he looked at them with wonder, for he knew then that they must be Dundwain of the south, men of the line of the lords of Westerness. After a while he spoke to them, but they were slow and cautious in answering. They named themselves Mablung and Damrod, soldiers of Gondor, and they were rangers of Ithilien, for they were descended from folk who lived in Ithilien at one time before it was overrun. From such men Lord Denethor chose his forayers, who crossed the Anduin secretly, how or where they would not say, to harry the orcs and other enemies that roamed between the Etheldwath and the river. It is close on 10 leagues hence to the east shore of Anduin, said Mablung, and we seldom come so far afield. But we have a new errand on this journey. We come to ambush the men of Herod. Curse them. Aye, curse the Southrons, said Damrod. 'Tis said that there were dealings of old between Gondor and the kingdoms of the Herod in the far south, though there was never friendship. In those days our bounds were away south, beyond the mouths of Anduin and Umbar. The nearest of the realms acknowledged our sway, but that is long since. 'Tis many lives of men since any passed to or fro between us. Now of late we have learned that the enemy has been among them, and they are gone over to him or back to him. They were ever ready to his will, and have so many also in the east. I doubt not that the days of Gondor are numbered, and the walls of Minas Tirith are doomed, so great is his strength and malice. But still we would not sit idle and let him do all as he would, said Mablung. These cursed Southrons come now marching up the ancient roads to swell the hosts of the Dark Tower. Yea, up the very roads that craft of Gondor made. And they go ever more heedlessly, we learn, thinking that the power of their new master is great enough, so that the mere shadow of his hills will protect them. We come to teach them another lesson. Great strength of them was reported to us some days ago, marching north. One of the regiments is due by our reckoning to pass by, sometime ere noon, up on the road above, where it passes through the cloven way. The road may pass, but they shall not while Faramir is captain. He leads now in all perilous ventures, but his life is charmed, or fate spares him for some other end. Their talk died down into a listening silence. All seemed still and watchful. Sam, crouched by the edge of the fern brake, peered out. With his keen hobbit eyes, he saw that many more men were about. He could see them stealing up the slopes, singly or in long lines, keeping always to the shade of grove or thicket, or crawling, hardly visible in their brown and green raiment, through grass and brake. All were hooded and masked, and had gauntlets on their hands, and were armed like Faramir and his companions. Before long they had all passed and vanished. The sun rose till it neared the south. The shadows shrank. "I wonder where that dratted golem is," thought Sam, as he crawled back into deeper shade. "He stands a fair chance of being spitted for an orc, or being roasted by the yellow face, but I fancy he'll look after himself." He lay down beside Frodo and began to doze. He woke, thinking that he heard horns blowing. He sat up. It was now high noon. The guards stood alert and tense in the shadow of the trees. Suddenly the horns rang out louder, and beyond mistake from above, over the top of the slope. Sam thought that he heard cries and wild shouting also, but the sound was faint, as if it came from some distant cave. Then presently the noise of fighting broke out near at hand, just above their hiding place. He could hear plainly the ringing grate of steel on steel, the clang of sword on iron cap, the dull beat of blade on shield. Men were yelling and screaming, and one clear, loud voice was calling, "Gondor! Gondor!" "Sounds like 100 blacksmiths all smithying together," said Sam to Frodo. "They're as near as I want them to come." But the noise grew closer. "They are coming," cried Damrod. "See, some of the Southrons have broken from the trap and are flying from the road. There they go, our men after them and the captain leading." Sam, eager to see more, went now and joined the guards. He scrambled a little way up into one of the larger of the bay trees. For a moment he caught a glimpse of swarthy men in red running down the slopes some way off, with green-clad warriors leaping after them, hewing them down as they fled. Arrows were thick in the air. Then suddenly, straight over the rim of their sheltering bank, a man fell, crashing through the slender trees, nearly on top of them. He came to rest in the fern a few feet away, his face downward, green arrow feathers sticking from his neck below a golden collar. His scarlet robes were tattered, his corset of overlapping brazen plates were rent and hewn. His black plaits of hair, braided with gold, were drenched with blood. His brown hand still clutched the hilt of a golden sword. It was Sam's first view of a battle of men against men, and he did not like it much. He was glad that he could not see the dead face. He wondered what the man's name was and where he came from, and if he was really evil of heart, or what lies or threats had led him on the long march from his home, and if he would not really rather have stayed there in peace. All in a flash of thought, which was quickly driven from his mind, for just as Mabling stepped towards the fallen body, there was a new noise, great crying and shouting. Amidst it, Sam heard a shrill bellowing or trumpeting, and then a great thudding and bumping, like huge rams dinning on the ground. Where, cried Damrod to his companion, "may the valor turn him aside. Mumak. To his astonishment and terror and lasting delight, Sam saw a vast shape crash out of the trees and come careening down the slope. Big as a house, much bigger than a house, it looked to him, a gray-clad moving hill. Fear and wonder maybe enlarged him in the hobbit's eyes, but the Mumak of Harad was indeed a beast of vast bulk, and the like of him does not walk now in the Middle-earth. His kin that still live in latter days are but memories of his girth and majesty. On he came, straight towards the watchers, and then swerved aside in the nick of time, passing only a few yards away, rocking the ground beneath their feet. His great legs like trees, enormous, sail-like ears spread out, long snout upraised like a huge serpent about to strike, his small red eyes raging. His upturned horn-like tusks were bound with bands of gold and dripped with blood. His trappings of scarlet and gold flapped about him in wild tatters. The ruins of what seemed a very war tower lay upon his heaving back, smashed in his furious passage through the woods, and high upon his neck still desperately clung a tiny figure, the body of a mighty warrior, a giant among the swordings. On the great beast thundered, blundering in blind wrath through pool and thicket. Arrows skipped and snapped harmlessly against the triple hide of his flanks. Men on both sides fled before him, but many he overtook and crushed to the ground. Soon he was lost to view, still trumpeting and stamping far away. What became of him, Sam never heard. Whether he escaped to roam the wild for a time until he perished far from his home, or was trapped in some deep pit, or whether he raged on until he plunged in the great river and was swallowed up. Sam drew a deep breath. An Oliphant it was, he said. So there are Oliphants, and I have seen one. What a life! But no one at home will ever believe me. Well, if that's over, I'll have a bit of sleep. Sleep while you may, said Marabung. But the captain will return, if he is unhurt, and when he comes we shall depart swiftly. We shall be pursued as soon as news of our deed reaches the enemy, and that will not be long. Go quietly, if you must, said Sam. No need to disturb my sleep. I was walking all night. Mabung laughed. I do not think the captain will leave you here, Master Samwise, he said, but you shall see. That is the end of that chapter, and I think that is where I am going to end the stream for tonight. I thank you for coming and joining, and I'm sorry it's not very long. I need to go turn my air conditioner back on because it is getting hot. So we will see you hopefully again soon. I will try to stream again tomorrow. I'm going to try to stream some Minecraft at some point and see if the computer will handle it. So you can not only hear me read, but you can watch how I do stupid things in Minecraft. Because I dig a lot of holes. And I have a lot of cats. Nostalgia Gaming, thank you for the follow and thank you for being here. And again, I will see you all again soon. Have a great rest of your day or night. And yeah, hopefully I will see you all tomorrow.
Initiating goodnight sequence. Dispersing appropriate dosage of compound 347. Initiating phase 1 of memory calibration. This won't hurt a bit. Just close your eyes.